Hello and welcome back to Kairos, here again with Pastor Fraser Pearce, this time to talk about the real presence of Christ in Holy Communion, some thoughts on a recent interview with Bishop Barron, and wider issues of dialogue with the Catholic Church. So Fraser, we were talking recently about Bishop Barron, who I've included in a video before, and an interview with him about their church's teaching on Holy Communion, the Holy Sacrament, and how little people understand this. It got us thinking about issues in our own church and our teaching. And so let's talk about that a little bit today. Perhaps you can begin by just telling us about the interview with Bishop Barron.
Yeah, so I saw this interview through a link on Rodrea's blog site. In fact, Rodrea, ex-Catholic, current Orthodox writer. He's perhaps well known to some Christians for writing a book called The Benedict Option. Maybe one day we'll talk about that here, who knows. And he linked to this recent clip of Bishop Barron talking about the lack of understanding in the Catholic community in America of their church's own teaching when it comes to the Lord's Supper, particularly problematic with those under 40. Many of them don't know their church's teaching that the bread and the wine are confessed to be the body and blood of Christ, and those who do know, and many of them, reject it, right? And that's quite interesting to watch Bishop Barron getting angry about this, understandably angry, and also not necessarily angry at others, but also acknowledging his own faults and failures in handing on the faith, right? And it's funny because this teaching that the bread of Holy Communion is the body of Christ and the wine is his blood is something that we share in common with Catholic people.
Yeah, this is our confession as Lutheran Christians.
Right. Now, we don't use the same terminology. We don't subscribe to the same philosophical framework of talking about and thinking about the Lord's Supper as the Catholics traditionally have done. But when it comes to how we engage with our Catholic brothers and sisters, talk about this sort of teaching and ways we try to establish without using jargon what's going on, that can be very helpful, in fact.
And you do have a particular interest in this relationship and how we talk about it with Roman Catholic brothers and sisters. Perhaps you can tell us about that.
Yes, I'm part of the Lutheran Roman Catholic dialogue in Australia and have been for some years. Now, the discussion they had on the sacrament of the altar predated my involvement. And yet, if you look at that sort of document and teaching which comes around it, you'll see there are certain issues they're trying to deal with. So, for example, Lutherans and Catholics and Orthodox too, and maybe Christians also from other traditions, would say that when it comes to Holy Communion, it's not our faith that establishes Christ's presence, but it's Christ's word. So, for example, we'd say, let's say someone comes to communion without true piety, without true faith. What do they receive? Is it just bread and wine? And our traditions, Lutheran, Catholic, Orthodox, would say, no, it's not just bread and wine they receive. They also indeed receive the body and blood of Christ. Not necessarily for their salvation, but it's not their faith or lack of it which makes Christ present or absent. So all of us together would say, Jesus says, this is my body, therefore that bread is his body. Jesus says, this is my blood, therefore that wine is his blood. We don't look to our own faith or lack of it. We raise our heads, listen to what Jesus says and trust what he says and confess the bread to be his body and the wine to be his blood.
And if we did a similar poll in our own circles in the Lutheran Church of Australia, do you think we would have similar frustrations perhaps at people's beliefs? I really don't know.
I was actually thinking about that. I think we might be slightly better off because many churches still use the small catechism for teaching in confirmation, and that, I think, is very clear on this issue, right? However, because the teaching is not what you'd expect, and you'd look at it and think, surely this is only symbolic, that I'm sure many Lutherans would say it's merely a symbol only. Now, of course, it is symbolic, just not only symbolic.
Yes. Yeah. And it's not, as you say, it's when we make this confession that in the Lord's Supper, with the bread and wine, we receive the body and blood of Christ. We're not saying that somehow we can completely understand this and philosophically explain it. We don't look inward and inside our heads or hearts or our consciences or whatever, but actually another way I've heard you talk about these things before is, are we willing to let Christ have the last word? Right. That's an understanding of faith in a way. It's his word, which says what it is. We take him at his word. That's pretty much what it comes down to.
Right. I think it's pretty significant too, because we I think are called to do the same thing when it comes to the forgiveness of sins, of course, strongly connected to the Lord's Supper. Do we trust that God has forgiven us? Well, there's a lot in us would say no. However, I think we're called by the Spirit to trust that Christ has the last word. As far as I'm concerned, my sins aren't forgiven, but Jesus, I'll let you have the last word in my life and give my amen to your word.
This is the life of faith.
That's right.
Well, the real presence in the Lord's Supper, a few interactions with the thoughts of Bishop Robert Barron and Roman Catholic and Lutheran dialogue. This is Kairos. God bless you. And Fraser, just before you leave us for today, I don't suppose you've got a joke for us?
Yes, I do. Josh loves hearing my jokes. He says, please repeat them as often as you can. I like this joke. It gave me a laugh. The setting is a philosophy department meeting, right? They're all there and they're engaged, being philosophers, in heated debate. And in fact, so much intellectual energy is expended in their debate that it creates a fissure in the time-space continuum through which a genie materialises. And of course, they're stunned. It causes great epistemic confusion. What are they actually seeing, right? But the genie then addresses the chair of the meeting. He says, it's your lucky day, mate. You can choose to be wealthy, or you can choose to be wise, or you can choose to be handsome. What do you choose? Now, normally this language of choice would be a provocation to the chair, who is a strict materialist and determinist of the old school, right? But there's the genie, and there's the offer. So being a philosopher, he says, of course, I choose wisdom. And there's a crackling spark of magic in the room as the genie grants the wish and then dematerialises. Well, there's again stunned silence in the room, and everyone looks directly at the chair. What will he say with his new gotten wisdom? And with a look of realisation that comes from apprehending for the first time a deep truth, the philosopher says, I should have chosen the money. Now, that's a good joke. And if I just may theologise for a moment on this. In Luther's treatment of the first commandment, you shall have no other gods, he says that in fact human beings naturally have a god, and it's mammon, money and possessions. And I think that joke kind of smokes out this reality. We find it funny because, you know, it seems from a human point of view, with the unconverted heart, that money truly is the thing that should be chosen above all else. Anyhow, that's a joke that gives me some amusement. And as you know, Josh, I'm easily amused and I have lots more jokes for you.
Indeed. Keep in touch on future videos for more jokes, perhaps.